This is intrinsic consciousness as a fundamental intrinsic property. So we need a scientific definition of consciousness, a technical scientific definition of consciousness. I've given that scientific definition of consciousness. It's on Reddit, and it's a written essay that I posted on Reddit on the Our Consciousness forum, as well as other forums, and it's also linked on in the comments in my YouTube video, the long video about quantum mechanics. So you can see the technical scientific definition of consciousness, and I'm also going to present it in this lecture series, but I'm not going to do it today. That's going to be in lecture 4. We will talk about the technical scientific definition of consciousness. That's for lecture 4. And you may think, oh, you should give the definition of consciousness first. Well, I have given the definition, and also I think it's better to put it later in this lecture series, because definitions don't actually come first. First you have to make a lot of observations of the world around you, then the definition comes. So having the definition somewhat midway in the lecture series actually makes sense in terms of how scientific definitions are formed. You know, first Isaac Newton had to spend a long time studying a whole lot of observations, not just observations made by himself, but by Galileo and Kepler as well, amongst others, before he came up with his definitions and the laws. So the scientific definition will be in the next lecture. The technical scientific definition of consciousness, or you can check out the written, the essay where I wrote it up, that's on Reddit. Okay, so today, lecture 3. This is lecture 3. I've named this lecture Free Will. Very important philosophical topic. Very important existential topic. To be frank, and I think this is pretty undeniable, if we don't have free will, our lives are meaningless. That's kind of pretty inescapable. Like, you spend all day, every day, making decisions. At least that's how it appears to you from your subjective point of view. And if you yourself, if you're not making those decisions, and they're being predetermined, and have always been predetermined since the beginning of the universe, you're just watching you're just watching a show where from your perspective watching this show, it seems like you have free will, but you don't. And therefore, none of your decisions mean anything at all. You're not responsible for them. And the universe is kind of this strange trick being played on you, where you spend every day living as if you have free choice, feeling as if you have free choice, but it's just a big trick. Now, I contend that is very wrong, and I'm showing that it's wrong. You do have free will, but as we discussed in lecture 2, it's limited free will. So in the last lecture we discussed quantum, and that's great news, by the way. That means that your life has meaning, and that your choices are meaningful, and you make them based on your past experience throughout your life. And you're responsible for them. You're responsible for your life and your choices, and that's altogether a good thing. It's a very, existentially, philosophically, it's very motivating to know that. Thinking that all your choices and actions don't mean anything, they're not really yours, is very existentially demoralizing. Okay, so it's good news. Good news, you have free will. Your life is not meaningless. But it's limited free will. You can't choose to do anything you can imagine. But you can choose between limited options of limited sets of future possibilities, future possible actions and states that you can instantiate. So you can click on the thumbs up, or you can click on the thumbs down. That's based on your perception of your local universe, your perception of the thumbs up and thumbs down buttons, and your mouse, so that you can perform those actions. And then it comes down to you collapsing a wave function or making a conscious choice to click up or click down. And you do this all your life. Constraints can be placed on you, and that can further limit your free will. So we can tie you to your chair, and then you no longer have amongst your set of future possible actions, the action of getting up out of your chair and moving around is removed. Okay, so we tie you to your chair, we further limit your free will. Or we can expand your free will. How do we expand your free will? Well, experience expands your free will. Let's think of an example there. You know, the experience of learning to drive. For example, this is just an example off the top of my head. You spend all that time consciously learning how to drive, which changes the structure of your brain, because there are specific conscious experiences, and those specific conscious experiences correspond to specific neuronal activity in the brain, which changes the shape of your brain, the configuration of your brain, such that you're able to drive. So then in some scenario you can imagine that increases your set of future possible actions to instantiate, because you could say, I can walk, I can take the bike, or I can drive. Whereas I can only say I can walk or I take the bike because I don't know how to drive. That's one loose analogous example. So we can see how, you know, evolution has made us more intelligent, expanded our minds, and then culture expands our minds with education. These expand our sets of future possible actions that we can imagine and then instantiate. Okay, so we're going to so just before I'm going to recap what we said in lecture 2, but just before I do that, I wanted to say a couple of things. One, well, we are investigating consciousness, human consciousness. Now, the only consciousness you ever experience is your own. So if you want to rigorously and scientifically and completely explore consciousness, you have to start investigating. That is to say, observing your own conscious experience with mindfulness and meditation. Now, we're saying all energy is consciousness. It's conscious. One experiment you can do to start convincing yourself of this is to lie down on your bed and close your eyes and just put your consciousness in different parts of your body and see how you can feel the consciousness in your toes, your legs, your stomach. You can put your consciousness pretty much anywhere within your body. Now, one very simple explanation of that is that all your body is conscious. It's all made of conscious particles, and they come together in different forms. The different forms give rise to different conscious experiences. And then all the different conscious experiences from the different parts of your body are centralized into one conscious experience, which is your personal center of consciousness. And because it's all conscious, conscious states, conscious entities like particles transmit their conscious states to their nearest neighbors, or share their conscious states with their nearest neighbors. So from your foot to your brain to your center of consciousness, there's a transmission of consciousness, kind of like Chinese whispers. So we're talking about the nervous system now. So yeah, as I said, in the next lesson we're going to give the scientific definition, but now we're going to talk, in this lecture we're talking about free will and a few practical applications of our theory. So we've said all energy is conscious. Now let's look at the nervous system. Okay, so until now the nervous system, how it works, and the consciousness of the nervous system hasn't been explained at all, because there's no theory of consciousness. But now we have our new postulate, and we say all energy is conscious. That means every part of your body is conscious. every piece of it. So the flesh of your foot, for example, is conscious and is having some conscious experience. And you can share in that conscious experience because you're physically connected to it. And if you're physically connected to something, you're also consciously connected to it. So then we try and work out what the nervous system is. And we look at the body and we see that the nervous system kind of is like wiring that goes into every part of the body. And it's the same wiring. The nerves that run into your fingers are the same nerves, like it's made of the same stuff. Nerve fibers that are in your fingers are the same nerve fibers that are in your stomach. Okay, you don't need different nerve fibers for different parts of the body. It's all the same wiring, the same way different parts of a computer are all wired up. Or you could have a computer that's all wired together using the same type of wire. So, for our very brief, quick, basic model of the nervous system, we say that the consciousness of the nervous system, that is, the nervous system is made of conscious particles and stuff, conscious molecules and things like that, and they have a purpose. The nervous system, the molecules forming the nervous system, we might think of them, one way of putting it might be as chameleon consciousness, which is, so conscious structures, our nerves, our nerve endings, are conscious structures that have the conscious property of being able to take on the conscious state of whatever they're surrounded by. Okay, so now you can start to see how we get a practical working theory of the nervous system. So a nerve ending is a physical and conscious structure that has physical and conscious properties. One of its conscious properties is that it's the stuff that is the nerve ending will take on the conscious experience of whatever it is surrounded by, whatever it is embedded in. And now we get an understanding of how the nervous system works, how it transports consciousness. You have a nerve ending in your foot, it's embedded in the flesh, embedded deep within the flesh. So it takes on, and the flesh is having a conscious experience all the time. All of it is conscious. Everything is conscious all of the time. So the flesh of your foot is having some conscious experience. The nerve ending is embedded in that flesh and is surrounded by it, and thus takes on the same conscious experience. That's the property that it has, chameleon consciousness. So it mimics the consciousness of the consciousness around it. And then in the nerve fiber, like once the nerve ending takes on the consciousness that's surrounding it, the nerve ending is connected to nerve wiring. So the nerve ending feels one conscious experience, which it passes on to its nearest neighbor in the nerve, which passes on to its next nearest neighbor. So the nerve wiring, like a game of Chinese whispers, where you pass a word from ear to ear, the nerves in your body pass a conscious sensation from, unit to unit of the nerve. Okay, and it goes all the way up your spine to, and it arrives at your center, your personal center of consciousness. That's why our central nervous system is called the central nervous system, because intuitively we picked up on the idea, without defining it all, we picked up on the idea that our central nervous system is creating our personal center of consciousness. So you're taking in all this all these conscious states are coming in through your sense organs, largely, and your skin and stuff, and they're being transmitted via your nervous system to your center of consciousness, and all that information gives rise to your conscious state at any moment. And then, of course, you have this conscious ability of focusing your conscious attention in a particular part of your body, which is you sending the transmission to the, energizing that somewhat energizes that part of the body, and you can focus your attention on that conscious experience as it's transmitted by your nerves. So there we see, the fact that all energy is conscious. We see how we can start using that fact to make practical models of different conscious systems, like the nervous system. Okay, so yeah, one thing to do, now you can verify that for yourself. Now you see, we're talking about consciousness, and consciousness is subjective. So how can you verify these things that I'm saying? Well, the only conscious experience you can ever see is your own, so you can only verify what I'm saying based on your own subjective experience of consciousness, because you don't experience any other consciousness. So you can lie on your bed, and you can just practice putting your consciousness in different parts of your body and checking that, yes, your whole body is conscious. And it feels like your consciousness is down there at your foot. If you put your consciousness at your foot, it actually feels like somehow the consciousness, you're experiencing it, and it's somehow down there. We won't get into how that works exactly at the moment. That's a bit more complicated, and involves us. We need to make some preliminary remarks about the consciousness of time and stuff like that. Consciousness of time and space, how you perceive space according to my theory. But we're not going to do that today. We're talking about free will. I just wanted to, just for incentive, I wanted to show simple practical models of conscious experience that we can form already with what little we've done, with what little progress we've made so far in the course. Another example, another reason why you should believe that everything is conscious, another reason is, let's take vision for example. Well, vision involves an interaction with a purely physical thing, which is light. Now, light is well defined in physics, we know what it is, and it's purely a physical phenomena, and yet it directly alters and changes our conscious experience. And we can have conscious experience of light itself via our retinas. Now, if all energy isn't conscious, then the light, well, as people up to now have thought, then the light that we perceive is not conscious. But and that means that at some point between the light hitting our retina and us consciously perceiving it, there has to be some conscious interface, some non-conscious consciousness interface, which has never been perceived. There's no sign of any sort of interface like that, and there's no explanation of how the consciousness would turn on at that interface, or what the consciousness is made of at that interface. If the consciousness is made of energy as at that interface, if according to emergent theories, consciousness is formed out of energy, well, the simplest way for consciousness to be formed out of energy, instead of it switching on around special configurations, is just all consciousness, all energy to be conscious. Then we see vision becomes perfectly simple to understand. Conscious light interacts with the conscious atoms and particles, rods and cones of your retina, causing a particular conscious experience in the rods and cones, depending on the frequency of the light that's being seen. And that conscious experience of the retina is transmitted via nerve consciousness through the optic nerve to the brain, to your center of consciousness, where it's perceived as visual perception. A similar argument runs for auditory perception. And then we can say a quick word about taste and smell, as well as drugs and how that makes sense with my theory. What is happening when you taste something? Well, it's a physical process, a chemical process, well defined objectively by modern science. Food is made up of molecules, and those molecules have different shapes, and those molecules interact with your tongue. And the way they interact is they kind of slot into receptors some particular molecules will slot into particular receptors, like there are little holes in your tongue, and the molecules go into the holes and kind of there's an interaction between the physical interaction between the molecule and the tongue. Now, according to my theory, all molecules are conscious, and your tongue itself is conscious as well. And so the physical interaction of the molecule and the tongue is also a conscious interaction, and that particular conscious interaction is then transmitted via your central nervous system to your center of consciousness, where you experience the taste. Now, and then we arrive at a principle that we'll discuss in more detail later, which is the principle of similar forms. Similar physical forms give rise to similar conscious experience. That's why two humans have similar conscious experiences and can understand each other, because they're similar physical forms. So they have similar conscious experiences. So I have a stomach, you have a stomach, connected to our brains. They're more or less the same, so they have more or less the same conscious experience. So I know so when I say I'm hungry, you know exactly what I mean, what conscious sensation I'm talking about, despite the fact that you can never experience my hunger and can only experience your own hunger. So similar forms give rise to similar conscious experience. That's why all sugar molecules taste sweet, because they're have the same molecular form. Therefore, they are experiencing within themselves the same conscious experience. And so when they interact with your tongue, they all interact in the same way. And they create within your tongue the conscious sensation of sweetness, which is then transmitted from your brain transmitted from your tongue via your central nervous system, where it is perceived by your center of consciousness. So those are a few applications, so you can see the plausibility of this theory. Here's another little idea. Do you know those 9-volt batteries? They're cuboid, small little cuboid batteries with the two weird circular kind of connector things on the top of them. Well, if you touch those two connectors on your tongue, you'll experience a very distinct conscious experience in your tongue. Particularly, you'll get a very strange, mild, slight but strange and unpleasant, actually, electric shock. A very mild and pleasant electric shock. Now, what's happening there? Well, you're causing an electric charge to be circulated through. Yeah, I mean, you're closing it. I haven't thought about this before, but I guess you're closing a circuit using your tongue to close the circuit of the battery, so that electric current flows through your tongue. Now, that's a purely physical process. Now, according to conventional science, all the things involved are non-conscious, and it's just electricity and voltage and those types of things. So it's a purely physical process of electricity passing through your tongue, and yet what do you feel? You feel a conscious sensation, proving to you that physical processes involving things like just electricity have give rise to concomitant conscious experiences. Okay, so the simplest explanation of that is that the electricity and the tongue and everything, all energy, is conscious, and then different physical processes, of which there are many, according to conventional physics, all contain within themselves concomitant conscious experience. And, put the battery on your tongue, it feels like electricity. So that's the feeling of conscious electricity passing through your conscious tongue, transmitted to your center of consciousness by your central nervous system. So you can see already, all we've done is change the fundamental postulate, all energy is conscious. And now we get a nice model of the nervous system, and we get a few applications of it. Okay, so I wanted to do that for motivation, and here's some more motivation, and this is more important motivation, I think. And that's the placebo effect. Another scientifically documented phenomenon that corroborates strongly, very strongly, with my theory, the placebo effect. Okay, 26 minutes already. So the placebo effect. You can instantly see how the placebo effect makes sense. All your body, all the molecules, all the cells in your body are forms of consciousness, having their particular conscious experience, and they're all connected to your center of consciousness and your mind. The mind is the most. Your mind is the most immediate layer around your center of consciousness, and it's always presenting you with ideas and suggestions. And you can check that by meditation. Your mind surrounds your center of consciousness and is constantly presenting it with possible actions and states that you can then choose to instantiate. Your center of consciousness is what witnesses and what makes decisions. Your center of consciousness is what collapses the wave functions available to you. Placebo effect. So yeah, if your whole body is conscious and it's all consciously connected, and your mind is in control, is where your body is controlled from, and it's all totally connected together, we can see immediately how the placebo effect works. Conscious thoughts in the mind have, send out particular conscious experiences and states and messages, send them out to the rest of your body via your central nervous system. So this is where acceptance of my theory, I think, becomes really very important, imperative. So after I'm finished this lecture course is going to be short, 6, 7, 8 lectures. I should be able to get everything I need to get out. I'll do another lecture on the placebo effect. And its promise as a cure for, maybe not a total cure for cancer, but certainly to start developing the placebo effect. Basically, I won't get into it now, but I have particular ideas about the placebo effect and how they can be used, how the placebo effect can be used as an extra, as something that could replace things like chemotherapy and such. Because yourself, your thoughts have a tremendous effect on your body and your health. You know what stress can do to you and stuff like that, and how just thinking about things can cause tremendous stress, and it causes tremendous stress throughout your whole body. Now all you're doing is thinking about stuff in your mind. And how the consciousness of what you're thinking about, whether it's stressful or pleasant, stressful or relaxing, how that permeates your entire body from radiating out from your mind. Just thinking can be very harmful for your health. Then you've got to imagine how much time we do spend thinking, and once someone gets a cancer diagnosis, well, then the main thing they're going to be thinking about for quite a long time is not consciousness, is cancer. They're going to be thinking about that a lot. And depending on how they think, what I will propose in a future lecture on the placebo effect is spending more time monitoring what people think and how they react to diagnosis and stuff, and how genuinely convinced they are that they're going to heal or get better or not. This technique will involve journaling and monitoring of the thoughts of cancer patients, and then combining them all and doing statistical analysis, comparing the thoughts of people that recover from cancer with the thoughts of people that succumb to cancer, and seeing which thoughts tend statistically to lead to cure and which thoughts tend statistically to lead to illness. Okay, It's a very promising idea, I believe. The placebo effect has been proved beyond all doubt. It shows a link between our thoughts and our health. And then we start studying how, if there are any particular thoughts that psychologists can guide patients towards that correlate with healing. And then the ultimate hope, the aim there would be that we could do away with such, extreme treatments such as chemotherapy. And, this could really be the start of a science of conscious healing. But, of course, it has to be done systematically and scientifically. Anyway, that's for the future. But I do think that's one reason why I think it's important for me to finally be acknowledged, so that we can start working on such ideas. Okay, so those were some applications to keep you motivated. So let's talk now about, let's go back to our lecture 2 where we talked about quantum mechanics, and a little discussion about that, a little further discussion about that and free will. So I'm showing you now that you do have free will. Hallelujah. Praise his name. So, before quantum mechanics, there was one realm. There was the one universe. Our universe was just one realm, and that realm was the Newtonian realm. The realm of Newtonian physics, of classical mechanics, and it was deterministic. Then quantum mechanics came along, and probabilism reared its head. And then there were considered to be two realms, the quantum realm, the microscopic realm, and the Newtonian realm. And the microscopic quantum realm was thought to be inherently probabilistic. You can determine things totally in advance. You could just say, oh, this state will either end up in this final state A, or this final state B, or this final state C, or there could be many more states, or there could be a continuous set of states, depends on the quantum experiment in question. And there's a probability assigned with each state, so we can say, oh, there's a 20% chance it will land in A, 30% chance it will land in B, or a 50% chance it will wind up in state C. And this was thought to be irreducibly probabilistic, just decided by pure, unobservable chance, with no mechanism for that we can witness to see how the decision is made, just by pure intrinsic chance. Now, if you can say that particles behave due to pure intrinsic chance, you can also say that they, it's just as scientific to say that they behave due to pure intrinsic consciousness. Now, since we're conscious intrinsically, and we're made out of nothing except these particles, obviously it makes much more sense to postulate intrinsic consciousness, which is what we're doing. And the great thing about this interpretation of quantum mechanics is it aligns with our experiences of humans as we make conscious choices all day. So yeah, two realms you have, and we explain the two realms. In deterministic mechanics, Newtonian mechanics, you're not investigating, you're not examining or observing individual entities. You're not looking at an individual particle or an individual atom or an individual molecule, as you do in quantum mechanics. Or, in quantum mechanics, it doesn't have to be just one individual. You could have experiments involving two conscious individuals. Entanglement is one example of conscious experiments involving two distinct yet spookily connected conscious entities. In macroscopic physics, no, you have millions, billions, trillions of particles atomically or chemically linked, bound together into larger macroscopic forms. And these forms are, normal, the things that Newton was talking about, like cannonballs and tennis balls and, objects like the moon. These aren't complex configurations of these basic particles. In fact, they're very simple configurations of these basic particles, atoms, and molecules. And they're arranged in particular ways. And the way they're arranged in what are known as crystal lattices. Okay? And that just means a regular repeating pattern. There are different types of crystal lattices, but when you have talking about a macroscopic object like a ball or a rock, the atoms in it are arranged in just regular repeating configurations called crystal lattices. So each atom will have a point in the lattice, and it'll be regular. It'll be like each atom will be at the corner of a cube, if you understand what I mean. And this pattern can be repeated indefinitely to make the objects larger. Okay, 3D cube, an atom at each point, and then you just attach more and more cubes, and then you've got something like a diamond. That's what a crystal lattice is. Now then you see how you have all these individual conscious atoms all linked together, but in a way that doesn't create any special center. In a crystal lattice, there's no particular special center. Each position each atom in the crystal lattice has the same experience as all its surrounding neighbors. The only atoms with a different experience are the ones on the surface at the outer edge, because they don't have nearest neighbors to one side of them because they're at the edge they're on the surface of the object. So there's no center. There's no special center in these objects. So therefore, all the individual entities making up this object, they're all individually conscious, but they're not giving rise to one center of consciousness. So there is not one single consciousness making choices for the object. Okay, that's what a macroscopic object is. It's where a whole bunch of individual consciousnesses are linked together, and so that means a macroscopic object is many equivalent individual consciousnesses linked together. Okay, that's why its operations, its movements, its processes don't involve any individual choices. No single atom in a rock is deciding the rock's behavior. That's why it acts deterministically, and that's why it's amenable to classical Newtonian mechanics. In quantum mechanics, we look at an individual particle, an individual atom, or an individual molecule, and all these things have centers of consciousness. Center of consciousness of a particle is within the particle. Of an atom, the center of consciousness is in the nucleus, and then it has other centers of consciousness surrounding it in the electrons, but it's the nucleus that collapses the wave function. The other electrons just go along for the ride with the nucleus. The nucleus, or the electrons in the outer rings, just go along for the ride with the nucleus. But it's the nucleus that is making the decisions, the quantum decisions. That's why atoms reproduce quantum results. Same thing with molecules. There'll be one center of consciousness, and these molecules can get very big. These quantum molecules with one center of consciousness making the quantum decisions can get very big, and they're called buckyballs, large quantum objects. Relatively large, because no quantum object is actually large, but relatively large, complicated quantum objects. And they're very, very interesting objects because they allow for the possibility of theories concerning the human soul. Because the human soul obviously is a conscious entity, and if it exists in this universe, it has to be made out of energy and particles, because that's what everything is made of. And a quantum particle makes a lot of sense, because then it can detach from the body at death, and it can attach to another body, because quantum objects are observed to be able to do that. They can, be attached to, they can perch somewhere, and then they can detach from that position. But we're not going to get into that now, but it's just very interesting in terms of theoretical physics. Not just theoretical physics, but theoretical theology. But that's for a later lecture. That's very interesting. So we see that, so there we see the split into the two realms, the Newtonian realm and the quantum realm. And now I'm going to add a third realm, because we, us humans and animals, we seem to be something different. We don't seem to fit into either of those realms. That's why when you combine quantum mechanics and classical mechanics and you have conventional science, we can't make sense of what humans are. Hence the mystery of consciousness and the mystery of what we are. Now we need to add a new realm, a third realm. Because on the one hand, we're not microscopic, we're macroscopic. So you'd expect us to be determined, and yet we're not determined. I mean, you can check if you're determined at any time. Just, from your own personal perspective, remember, we have to base our theory of consciousness on our own experience of consciousness. You don't feel determined. You can do random things, strange, odd things. You can oppose gravity. You can change direction, spin around. You can do all sort of random things. You can be an artist, creative artist. Like, we don't appear at all to be deterministic creatures. We appear to be capable of free will, free choice, and creativity. So, and we seem to be capable of doing what quantum particles do, which is making choices between limited sets. So, what does this mean? It means that we're this third realm, which is macroscopic objects that have centers of consciousness, singular individual centers of consciousness. So now we have a definition of conscious life on Earth. We have quantum individuals, such as electrons and particles. They're making individual choices. Then we have macroscopic objects, classical objects. Their individual consciousnesses all linked together, but there's no center of consciousness, so there's no individual making the choices for the object. Objects like that follow Newtonian classical mechanics. Then there's us and animals. We're macroscopic objects that the configuration of all the atoms and energy in us gives rise within the macroscopic object to a center of consciousness that controls the macroscopic objects. That's the third realm. We could call that realm life. Now we want to be careful because all the universe is life, and it always has been. All the universe since the beginning of time has always been conscious life. The energy born in the Big Bang was conscious, and it's consciously evolved to where we are now, including the creation of individual centers of consciousness, such as particles, all the way up to humans. But then there's life as we understand it as humans. I suppose animate life, I should say. So animals and humans. We're macroscopic, yet there's one center of consciousness in control of making the choices for the macroscopic object. That's what a human is. How did that come about? Well, the universe has been around for 14 billion years, and it's been evolving all the time, and more complex forms evolve. We start out with just pure energy. It's totally homogeneous and undifferentiated, and makes particles out of itself. Then out of the particles it makes atoms. Out of the atoms, molecules, cells, all the way up to human. It gets more and more complex, but it takes billions of years. And part of that evolution here on Earth has been the evolution of macroscopic objects that have centers of consciousness that control the behavior of the macroscopic object. So that's what you actually are. Then your central nervous system is surrounding your center of consciousness. Most of the time, or your center of consciousness seems to be located behind your eyes somewhere. One possible position is the pineal gland. That's an ancient suggestion for the seat of consciousness. But then here's the thing, that you could have the human body, in fact, feels like it's more than one center of consciousness. For example, you also feel like you have a center of consciousness in your stomach. if you get nervous, you don't know you're nervous because your brain says, oh, hey, you're nervous. You know you're nervous because you get this very distinct feeling in your stomach. And it seems to be centered in your stomach. And you have sensation of it there. So it's a much less refined and less detailed center of consciousness in your stomach than the one behind your eyes. But it still seems like another center of consciousness connected to you. But the dominant center of consciousness of the human body is definitely in the brain. That's where you make the decisions and collapse the wave functions and make the choices that you make. So the center of consciousness is has the same conscious abilities as a conscious particle, like an electron, for example. An electron has perception of its local environment, local surrounding universe, conscious perception of its local surrounding universe, and it can also collapse wave functions, make choices between spin up or spin down, or many other examples. A human, within its center of consciousness, which is generated by its central nervous system, taking conscious information in from its local surrounding universe, your center of consciousness witnesses all that conscious experience coming into it, and it can make choices between different possible states and actions to instantiate. Now the interesting thing is it doesn't collapse every wave function of the body. It doesn't make every decision. It can pass off some decisions to the body. So for example, if someone were to run at you with a knife, well, that's not a good example, is it? If someone were to start attacking you and you're scared and you don't know how to fight, you just look away and your arms and your body automatically throws up your arms. What I mean to say is there are some actions that through the course of evolution, the center of consciousness eventually lets the body make the choices. And that frees up your conscious attention to make the choices that are most important to you. The most important choices that you make, you're conscious of yourself. But then you have limited physical abilities. You can't, based on your physical construction, your center of consciousness might want to rise up in the air, but gravity keeps pulling you down, for example, and won't let you. But you can choose to jump. Okay. Then there are two possibilities. So the center of consciousness is what perceives, what witnesses, and what chooses, what makes your decisions, your choices. But some choices it can pass off to the body. And that's a part of learning. So when you first learn to ride a bike, you're fully involved. Your center of consciousness is concentrating as hard as it can and is making every decision as best it can, and your adrenaline is pumping, and you're fully attentive. But then you learn how to ride a bike, and before long, you can just set your legs going, and your body just keeps them turning around almost the same way your heart just keeps going without you having to pay any attention to its pumping. So these learned activities become less and less conscious. You hand over these conscious operations to your body. Okay. Proof of a center of consciousness. Well, your whole conscious existence has taken place from a center of consciousness, and it's also involved you making choices all the time. Another meditation exercise that you should do to verify this: lie down in your bed, close your eyes, and just watch your mind. Just be the witness of your mind. And you'll notice that it just keeps throwing up thoughts. So your mind, your brain surrounds your center of consciousness. And part of its function is to throw up suggestions. suggestions for things to do and things to think about, and then you can engage with those suggestions or ignore those suggestions. But you can watch your mind and see that it just throws up suggestions. Now those suggestions are based on your personality, your past experience, but you don't construct the suggestions. Your mind just throws them up. You're a witness to them, and then you can choose to engage with them or not, and then you can kind of steer the thinking. But yeah, it's this verifies what we're talking about, and remember, we want a theory of consciousness that aligns with our own experience of consciousness. And yeah, your consciousness is centered, and you're surrounded, and your mind is surrounding your consciousness and giving you suggestions. Okay. So those are the three realms. We have the realm of quantum mechanics, where we have individual conscious entities making choices, macroscopic objects, lots of individuals bound together, but in a way that doesn't create a new center of consciousness, and then much more complex objects that have taken billions of years to evolve, such as humans, which are macroscopic objects that involve the complexity of a central, they generate their physical configurations that generate a center of consciousness within them that make decisions on behalf of the entire object. Okay. And yes, then now your body could just be temporarily creating the center of consciousness, and then when your body dies, that center of consciousness ends. Or there's another possibility, which I prefer, and that is that you have a center of consciousness which is actually a physical object, and it's your soul. And your soul is a physical, energetic thing, and of course, for souls to exist, they have to be physical and energetic, because everything that exists in our universe is physical and energetic. And your soul is a complex quantum molecule that has evolved over millions, maybe billions of years. And it exists at the center of your consciousness. It could be extended throughout your body, but and it could involve more than one center of consciousness linked together. Like there could be a center, your soul could be a complex quantum object with some existence at your stomach and behind your eyes as well, the chief center of consciousness. And this will be a quantum object that can make a quantum choice to disconnect from the body. And it, you know wave particle duality, so it could become a wave, reconnect with the surrounding energy of the universe, and then at a later point connect to another. So we're getting ahead of ourselves. These are just some of the very intriguing and exciting philosophical and scientific speculations that we can do. These are new kinds of theories. This is theoretical theology that we're talking about here. But anyway, we won't go into detail about that now. 54. So we're approaching an hour. Okay. So we talked about the three realms. We talked about some applications, the nervous system, placebo effect. Yes, and so yeah, you're a conscious center of, you're a physical center of consciousness that witnesses conscious perceptions of your surrounding local universe as they're transmitted to your center of consciousness by your nervous system, and then that can make choices based on what you perceive. But this center of consciousness can experience many different types of consciousness, ranging from being hyper alert and attentive all the way to sleep, where sleep involves when you're asleep you still are conscious. Everything is conscious all the time, but sleep is a kind of a conscious state that humans can achieve, where conscious experience is reduced to its absolute bare minimum. But you still do have some conscious perception while you sleep, as in, you have some conscious perception of the passage of time. Usually you can give some fairly accurate you know, you can usually tell if you've slept for 15 minutes as opposed to 5 hours. You'll pretty rely, like if you fall asleep and wake up and someone says, were you asleep for 15 minutes or 5 hours? You'll usually be able to say, not exactly, not very accurately, but you'll be able to say, oh, no, I was definitely asleep for longer than, you know, a detective could reasonably ask a person, how long do you think you were asleep for? That's not an unreasonable question. You know, if they're investigating some case. And you say, oh, I was only asleep for 10 minutes. You know what I mean. So yeah, but sleep, yeah, much reduced. So all conscious things have different conscious abilities, and part of our human conscious abilities is this ability to kind of get into this sleep trance state where we have very reduced very reduced conscious experience. Okay, now so we talked about free will. You have free will, selecting between sets. So I recommend listening to my longer lecture on quantum mechanics, where I explain 4 different experiments and prove that my interpretation of quantum mechanics is the best. One, the first simple and logical one that makes sense. And finally, now for the last 5 minutes, I just want to address one thing, one objection that people might have, which is, oh, I saw Sam Harris on Joe Rogan Experience, and he said, I don't have free will, and I'm just a predetermined robot. You know, I'm just a predetermined clockwork. And he says he proves this, or it's been proved because there's some experiment where the scientist doing the experiment, I don't know if he carried out these experiments himself or not, I don't think he did, but the scientist will know what choice you've made before you make the choice, before you know that you've made what choice you've made. So this is how that experiment works, and I'll explain why Sam Harris's conclusion is wrong, and I'll restore free will, and I'll restore cause and effect, logically and simply. So the idea is, the experiment is this: there's some choice, let's say between A and B, and the scientist is watching your brain with brain scanning technology, and if you choose A, a certain part of your brain will light up in a particular way, and if you choose B, your brain will light up in a different way, a distinct way. So the scientists can watch your brain and they see, oh, that part of the brain lit up in this particular way, so he chose A, or lit up in another particular way, so he must have chosen B. So they watch you make this choice, watch your brain as you make this choice, and then they ask you to say when you've made the decision. So they ask you to make the decision, and once you've made the decision, to inform them that you've made the decision, once you're sure that you've made the decision. And what they observe is they can tell before you say, oh, I've made the decision and it's this, they can tell which decision you've made. So what they're saying is it's not you that makes the decision, it's your brain that makes the decision, and then afterwards you yourself perceive that you've made the decision. Well, here's the problem here's the resolution of this, how we make sense of this. We change the experiment a bit. So now what we do is, because here's what's the problem with the reasoning. In this case, you're not just making a decision. You're doing 2 things. You're making a decision, and you're also watching yourself make a decision. Okay, you're being self-reflexive. This is a very advanced conscious technology. On Earth, only humans are capable of this. You know, animals aren't capable of meditation or watching their own thoughts or being mindful or self-reflexive. In that sense, animals live in a constant moment, as far as we know, based on our observations of them and how they behave. But we're different creatures, and we're more advanced creatures with much bigger brains, so we have different, we have more expanded ranges of conscious capabilities and abilities. So we can watch our own thoughts, we can be self-reflexive, we can look at our own minds, witness our own minds. So what you're doing in this experiment is you're doing two things. You're making a decision, and then you're checking and confirming if you've made the decision. Okay, normally you do not do that. Normally you make a decision and you don't confirm that you've made any decision. It doesn't, that doesn't happen, that doesn't enter into your consciousness. Like if you're lying on your bed and then you get up off your bed and you go to the fridge and you drink some milk, that requires a huge number of decisions. All of those, there's many decisions involved in that. Getting up, getting off the bed, walking to the fridge, opening the door, then, there's orange juice, there's milk. You see both. Which do you drink? And you make those decisions. But the thing is, in your normal everyday life, you don't notice that you're making any decisions. You're just moving through life, living. And you're in a kind of flow state of constant decision making. And here's the thing. The decision and the action are the same thing. Like your decision to get up off the bed coincides with you getting up off the bed. You decide, and that decision is instantly, that once that decision is made, it's transmitted to your legs, and you start moving. The action and the decision are the same thing, with some small delay for, the decision to be transmitted to the necessary muscles involved. So, and you don't consciously check that you've made any of these decisions. Now, you could be looking at your fridge and you see the milk and the orange juice, and then you decide what you're going to have, and then you go, yes, now there would be a delay, as you could decide to watch all your decisions you make all day and confirm all your decisions after the fact. But to confirm a decision has been made requires it has to happen after the decision. You can only give confirmation that, yes, I've made a decision after the act of making the decision. So that's what actually creates this time delay, where it appears that there's some delay between your decision and you realizing that you've made the decision. Well, yes, there is some time delay between them, but that doesn't mean that you don't make the decision. You do make the decision, and it's only after you've made the decision that you can then confirm that, yes, I have made the decision. And normally you don't do this secondary confirming process. And this secondary confirming process takes a little bit of time, which causes this time delay that makes it appear as if Sam Harris or the scientists know which decision you're going to make before you actually make it. And here's one way to prove this. We changed the experiment slightly such that the decision is an action, so that when you make the decision is an action or a choice between two actions. So either you hit button A or hit button B. Okay, and the decision is made as you hitting the button is the decision. The scientists say, okay, you have to decide which button to hit, A or B, and you make that decision by hitting the button, the particular button that you're choosing. Then we can see that the decision and the action are the same thing, and this requires no self-reflection. We know the decision has been made because the button has been pressed, and we know which decision has been made because of which specific button has been pressed. Immediately, there's no requirement for the person to subsequently confirm that they've made a decision. And then we'll see that the decision is that the person will know that they're making a decision because they're acting, they're moving their hand. And then we'll see that the decision and the action take place at exactly the same time. And the person knows when they're making the decision exactly as they make the decision. Like there'll be no discrepancy in time. Because obviously if you put your hand out to touch a particular button, you know that you're doing that. So you don't need to confirm that you've done it. Okay, so that resolves that little objection. So yeah, very good news. You do in fact have free will. Life is not meaningless. Your actions are your own. Your choices are your own. Of course, this means that you have a lot of responsibility to yourself and to the world. Yeah, it's interesting, you know. The universe, you know, lots of energy came into existence 14 billion years ago. This energy is conscious. It has conscious perception within itself, and it can choose new states of being. The first thing it did was choose to make particles out of itself, and all these particles were conscious, and all these particles spent all their time making different decisions to, you know, choices, and such as bonding together and stuff like that. So, you know, the universe created subsets out of itself, such as electron. An electron is a small subset of the universe. It's also a conscious center within itself, and it can make conscious choices. And these things, these particles could bond together and into atoms and molecules and cells, and it gets more and more complicated. And now you're a subset of the universe, a conscious subset of the universe that can make choices about the future state of the universe. Like, you don't get to control the whole universe, but you do get to control the subset of the universe that you are. And you know, thanks to evolution, you have a lot of powers. You know, you can lift things up and move things, so you can control quite a lot of the universe. And that's what we're doing here on Earth as conscious humans, making many millions, billions, trillions of decisions all day, every day, and moving things and changing things, and we're in control of this little subsection of the universe that we call Earth. But it is us making the decisions based on our education and our imaginations. And yeah, so that's a lot of responsibility. We have to be a lot more responsible than we have been being, because our choices were leading to the destruction of the planet. So we've got to start making wiser choices and calming down and meditating. And yeah, but this theory will help with that, because it will give us deeper understanding of what we actually are as conscious entities. And it will lead us away from these nonsense theories where consciousness doesn't exist, or consciousness is an illusion. No, your life is not an illusion. This is reality. It's conscious. It takes on different physical forms. You're a very special and complex, particular physical form within the universe. And I hope to be able to convince you that you have a physical soul that will outlive any body you happen to take on. And that gives great relief from anxiety caused by fear of, you know, anxiety or fear of death and things like that. So yeah, it's all very interesting stuff. You know, can you deny that the world around you at the moment is in the depths of a philosophical, scientific, and spiritual dark age? I personally don't think so. This is about as low as this. Well, it's pretty rough out there, isn't it? I don't want to be rude or anything, but and you know, we see the same thing in civilization when they go into dark ages. Obsession with money and clothes and food and stuff like that, and just bonoboism and mayhem and all that type of thing. And yeah, but what's the great thing about a dark age? Any ideas? The great thing about dark ages is that they produce renaissances. So, okay, so yeah, that's enough now. 1 minute and 1 hour and 10. So in the next lecture, and you saw some applications, and yet the placebo stuff is quite important. So it is, you know, it's worth actually now finally to start accepting. I mean, because I've been ignored for a long time. Well, yeah, I've been debating this for a long time, and yeah, you should check out on Reddit. Actually, I posted a lot of things, and I was in a lot of debate with scientists of consciousness, and I mean, to be frank, they don't have anything, no refutation. So it's time to start taking this seriously. I think it could have pretty, it will have profound medical consequences. Okay, so that's enough for lecture 3. In lecture 4, we are going to talk about the law of privacy. This is a new law of the universe. It's actually not a new law of the universe, but it's a new law as far as the modern world is concerned. So that's very interesting to talk about. The law. See if you can guess by the name what it means. The law of privacy. I'll give it its full name: the law of privacy of consciousness. We're going to discuss that briefly, state it clearly. It's essential for the physics of consciousness, and then we will put forth the technical scientific definition of consciousness. That's lecture 4. And lecture 5 then, I think, will be gravity, and that is special and general relativity and time and things like that. Okay. So I hope you understood that and got something from it. If you have questions and things, I'm all too happy to address them. So you can leave them in the comments and all that stuff. Okay, thanks for listening. All the best. Take care.